What's up, everybody? Over the last couple months, we've talked a lot about the Unreal 5 update coming to Squad. But today, we're going to discuss the gamble of betting on UE5 for Squad and its future. Now, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, leave a like, drop a comment down below with anything that I may have left out. It's also important to note that I'm not paid by Offworld, nor am I paid by Epic. You can support the devs and myself by using the code SLAY3K30 in the link in the description for 30% off. First, let's talk about some of the main things that the community seems to want. I'm basing this off comments and conversations around the community. One of the main things that the community has talked about for some time now is performance improvements. It's been almost 2 years since the last engine update, and since then I've noticed that my performance has never quite been what it was a couple of years ago. For example, my FPS has always seemed to be a little bit lower than it used to be, and of course, hitching, something that I've talked about a lot in some of my recent videos. Generally, performance is one of the hot topics around the game. And of course, tied to performance to some degree would be picture-in-picture scopes. This is another hot topic across the community at large ever since the infantry combat overhaul. Now, I don't necessarily think that the infantry combat overhaul and some of the mechanics that came with it is ever going to be really replaced fully, but I do think picture-in-picture scopes needs to be polished. I've talked about this in videos, especially with the playtesting, and how the performance was affected by picture-in-picture scopes. Whether it's Unreal 4 or Unreal 5, the performance drop-off with picture-in-picture scopes is a problem, because if you're losing 15 to 20 frames every time you ADS, it's just not ideal. And of course, this is something that Offworld is trying to address with Unreal 5. Now, something that we all tend to want is more factions and content coming to the game. Typically, when folks want content for Squad, it comes in the form of factions, maps, or maybe vehicles or some sort of additional weaponry. A lot of the community has asked for the Germany mod to be implemented, or the French mod. With the WPMCs, it was likely that we'd see more private military contractors added to the game at some point, and that would probably be a welcome addition to some, although of course we do want some conventional factions as well. But from an optics standpoint, it's important for the game to get updates like this with content and factions just to keep things fresh and continuing to add to the variety of things that you can play while in Squad. There's been a long desire for a vehicle overhaul. This includes the physics aspect of the vehicles and how they maneuver across terrain. Folks have asked for different damage models or different damage systems to be implemented, new scopes, and some level of map-oriented destruction. Now, next on the overhaul list would be game modes. This has been something that the community has requested, especially for game modes that aren't played as often. Attached to that would also be potentially adding new game modes to the game. I don't disagree with this one at all, because I do think we need a refresh of some of the game modes that are less played, because they could be implemented and help add a little bit more variety to the game. And of course, it would be nice to see something new added. Another area that I think we all would agree on would be POIs and map updates. I mean, more so in the sense of updating lanes, not just visual overhauls. Ideally, something that can update not only POIs or capturable objectives, but also tweak how Random Advanced Secure operates, since that is the most popular game mode across servers. Many of the maps right now feel a little bit stale or just predictable, especially if you're just pubbing and you're looking at Random Advanced Secure. You have a pretty good idea where things are going to go, and there's of course resources to help with that. But it'd also be great to see some of the older maps sort of reintroduced in a way that had more possible POIs to just continue adding more to the rotation that people typically play. And of course, to some extent, we all want some sort of visual overhaul, because some of the textures and the lighting doesn't look quite as good as it could. And then with the introduction of some of the Unreal 5 playtesting, we've seen how that changes the way Squad can be played. That's not even as much of a texture overhaul as it is a lighting rework. But looking at the Unreal 4 version of Squad compared to what it can be in the Unreal 5 playtest, it's pretty exciting from that standpoint. And that is something that has been talked about even prior to the playtest, is that Unreal 4 version of Squad does need a little bit of a facelift, especially to keep it competitive in a market where games are beginning to release that are built in Unreal 5. Now, Unreal 5 out of the box won't necessarily address all of the concerns or things that people want added or implemented into Squad. So first, let's talk about performance. The long-term benefits of Unreal 5 seem to point towards better performance with continued development and updates. With my limited research and based on what Offworld has said, there seems to be leaps in progress for the engine between 5.3, 5.5, and I've even heard 5.6 also offers continued performance improvements. So while at the release of 9.0, you may not get the frames or the performance that you want, it is still in active development that could see continued improvement over time. Since there are these updates that continue to improve the Unreal 5 engine, that's huge for the game in the long term, because we can continue to see the progress that Epic is making with the engine, maybe lending itself to better performance over the duration of a couple of years versus limited to what we have in Unreal 4 that isn't getting those updates. Additionally, we could see performance improvements across different maps. If they receive the same sort of treatment that Albazar has, or they just get assets that are made in Unreal 5, leaning on the Nanite engine, which is what Offworld has chosen moving forward, we could see benefits of that across more maps in the game. What else do we get out of the box from the Unreal 5 transition that is something that the community has asked for or talked about? That would be the vehicle overhaul, at least from the physics perspective. Which of course I think is significant because this is not something I necessarily expected with the transition, but it is a welcomed change. This will hopefully improve vehicles' ability to get through rough terrain and maybe even allow you to drive over some things. It'll also give each vehicle sort of its own feel. It also seems they'll be able to react to certain terrains or drive differently based on the terrains. The next thing that it addresses to some extent would be the visual improvements, primarily around lighting, contrast, and things like that. So not only does the battlefield look drastically different because of the improved lighting, you also don't have visual fog. You have increased range and distance to be able to see what's going on out on that battlefield, which I think will create significant changes to how armor and vehicles will play on any given map. It's interesting taking a look at what you can see in Unreal 5 with some of these improvements to the visuals. Meanwhile, you go and you look at Unreal 4 and it looks incredibly flat in comparison. While this isn't an overhaul of all textures, it does make a significant difference in how these maps look and how impressive they are. Just take a look at Scorpo in Unreal 5, or the new Albazar for that matter. It's pretty impressive what just lighting and those sort of adjustments has made those maps into. Now that's three things that we know 9.0 will in some way address. Picture-in-picture scopes is something that we need to see sort of the proof that it can be fixed or remedied in Unreal 5, and that is something that Offworld has talked about working on. We've addressed it in a couple of videos now as a major concern of mine. Now we all want more content, more factions added, more maps, and all of that. There's no point in developing maps with Unreal 4 in mind if we can start developing maps in Unreal 5 or updating maps with the new engine. One holdup to this, though, is that every faction is going to have some form of vehicle, maybe vehicle specific to that faction. And if so, you don't want to build those out in Unreal 4 just to have to transition them to Unreal 5. But that's with the transition to Unreal 5 in mind. Can you continue to add content to Unreal 4? Sure. Does that help performance in some of the other areas that we've discussed with this? I don't know. I don't know if it's ideal to continue to add things to something that already doesn't run great. And of course, outside of that, this doesn't improve or update any game modes. And of course, this doesn't necessarily fix POIs or lanes on maps. Although I do think that with revisiting some maps to update them to Unreal 5, hopefully Offworld takes a chance and starts looking at how to update those maps from that perspective of trying to make random advances secure into a game mode that is more random. Now, something I didn't mention earlier in the video that is something that the community has asked for or continues to ask for is general bug fixes. The reason for not including it earlier is because I don't know exactly what we're going to get with Unreal 5. How many of those bugs persist in Unreal 4, continue over to Unreal 5, versus how many new bugs do we create with Unreal 5 while remedying some of the ones that exist within Unreal 4? The dream is probably to have Unreal 5 delete a lot of the bugs we had issues with in the Unreal 4 engine, but I doubt that that's necessarily what's going to happen. I'm sure we will discover new things or we'll have new issues. And maybe some things that continue over, but I don't really know exactly what all that looks like with the engine transition. The reason I bring all this up is to talk about the gamble that's being taken on Unreal 5. And I call it a gamble because of course you are risking something by transitioning to a new engine. But I felt like we needed to reference some of the things that the community has asked for, not necessarily what Unreal 5 means to Offworld or what Offworld is pitching as the next version of Squad. I thought it was important to reference some of the things that are often talked about amongst the community as wants or needs for the community, not so much what the developer thinks is necessary for the game. This is certainly not everything, but it's a lot of the things that I see pretty regularly that I'm sure Offworld also notices. Obviously, Squad isn't a new game, and when you want all of these new things, the question comes up, are you looking for a new game entirely, or do you transition to a new game engine? What updates can be done to provide the community with some of the things that they want? And we're also not limited to answering to the community. We're also talking about relevancy. At some point, we have to look at the game in the context of if it's staying relevant amongst other FPSs that may be coming out. While it may not compare to many games that get frequent updates or new releases, it still compares to other games out there, as some of you will often mention Armor Reforger as an alternative to Squad. To stay relevant, you need updates, whether it's visual things, more factions, or whatever, but you have to keep pumping that content out. In the short term, like most significant updates to a game, this will be divisive to some extent. Whether it's the fact that folks can't play the Unreal 5 version of the game based on the equipment they have, or that there could be a bunch of bugs or things that slow down the performance of the game or cause issues for some players at the start of 9.0. The problem is that if we want all of these nice fancy things for the game itself, and we want the game to continue to operate and be playable for us, they have to make some form of movement towards the future. Whether that's Unreal 5 or making Squad 2, one of those two things has to happen eventually. Unless Squad 2 is drastically different and offered a ton of different things, I feel like there's going to be a gripe about having to pay for it. And then you're still going to fracture the community to some extent with folks that are unwilling or uninterested or just can't necessarily upgrade to a new game. So you're at a crossroads. If you make a new game, you split the community. You fracture it behind a paywall. If you work within the same game and update the engine, at least you maintain the same community in the same sort of framework, which I think based on the scale of the player base is important. So I pose the question to you all. What would you rather have? If you have to upgrade, if the game has to progress somewhere, what do you want? Unreal 4 can't be the answer forever. At some point, if you stay stagnant within that area, the game will slowly die. I realize the means for updating equipment may not always be there, and that's a difficult thing to have to deal with. But simultaneously, every game is pushing the boundary slowly but surely. And at some point, to keep up with whatever else is out there beyond just squad, upgrades and things are going to happen. But anytime I post a video related to an update, regardless if it's 9.0 Unreal 5 or another update that's already occurred, I get a series of comments. These comments suggest passion or interest in the game and the game's success, regardless of whether they're positive or negative. And while my approach may be to be a little bit hopeful or positive about the upcoming updates or the future of Squad, I kind of need to be because you're on my YouTube channel that is focused largely on Squad content. So there's something at risk for myself as well based on however the Unreal 5 update goes. But there's a significant amount of passion and care by the community for this game. But regardless of what we see in the upcoming months, the game has to advance at some point. We have to see some form of progress. We're already in a content drought because we've been waiting on this update that Offworld has taken about 2 years to develop. So while it is a gamble because no update is without potential drawbacks, the game has to continue to move forward. Offworld is looking at Unreal 5 and developing it as a means to answer and deliver on a lot of the things that the community has asked for, wants, or what the game needs. So while it is a gamble, it is a necessary step for Offworld to take to help secure the future and continue development of Squad. With all that said, hit the subscribe button so I can help keep you up to date on what's going on with 9.0 and future updates to Squad. Leave a like and drop a comment down below with any thoughts you have. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.